Hey, friends, welcome back to another episode of Coaching for Millennials. I am your host, Jose Miguel Longo. I'm excited to bring you another episode filled with so much goodness and a lot of information. So, for this one, you may want to bring your pen and paper because there's going to be a lot of golden nuggets to take notes on. So, let's dive in. Okay, so welcome to another episode of Coaching for Millennials. Today, we're going to be talking about embracing your story, transforming negativity into action. So, if you've noticed, there is a reoccurring theme that in each episode, there's some form of mindset coaching or some form of conversation around mindset and what that means. And as a life and career coach, I think that anything I do, whether I'm working with a client or I'm working on a project that's for the coaching business or I'm talking to people that I know, regardless of what topic it is, mindset always comes back to the forefront. So I feel like it's important to mention this from a validation perspective of always know that every action you take and every step you take in your life, mindset has a connection to it. And how we carry and use our mindset is always going to be the way that things actually end up turning out. And I'll share a lot of examples in this conversation about what we're going to cover and how it relates to mindset, but also my personal experiences and my journey. So there's five themes that I want you to take note on when it comes to today's conversation. The first theme is the narrative, and I'm calling this the millennial narrative. The second theme is why our stories matter. The third theme is listening to the voice within. The fourth theme is turning stories into action. And then the last theme is sharing your story authentically. So these are the different ideas and topics we're going to talk about today's episode. I wanted to mention those ahead because in case you're taking notes and you feel like this is going to be something that's going to be informative for you, but also inspirational, that you at least have a framework of where to start from and how to take your notes to kind of bring it all together for yourself. So when we talk about the first theme, which is the millennial narrative, I mentioned it's just called the narrative, but I'm calling it the millennial narrative. This is important because we have, as millennials, different themes that are common idea. And some of it comes from a negative perspective and how it's impacted in our lives. And other parts of it are based on society. They're based on how society has provided certain pressures or created some form of internalized beliefs that we've shaped in our minds and our brains and our hearts and how we react to those things. So, from a narrative perspective, the objective here is to reshape or reframe the narrative so that we can then interpret a different formation from it. So here's an example. Obviously, many of us grew up hearing that we could be anything we wanted to be, right? Go to school, get an education, or if you work hard, you can achieve your goals, or you can have that white picket fence and have the American dream. And the reality is that maybe for some of us, for a very small percentage, that has come to fruition and that's actually happened and you've been successful in obtaining that. But those people obviously worked very, very hard to get to that, unless they were fortunate enough where it was just given to them and it was handed to them. And nothing wrong with that, right? You can't hate on for people from having the luxury or the opportunity or the access to those things. But for some of us who have to work super hard in today's world to get to our goals and reach a certain level of what we want for ourselves financially or economically or mentally or professionally, we have to work harder. So we've obviously have been given this idea interpretation that's been ingrained into our brains that we can become and do anything. And I still believe this is true. However, for some of us who are struggling, we may find ourselves juggling multiple side hustles or trying to make ends meet, or we're just disconnected from the idea of that we could actually make the story that we created for ourselves, that we dreamed of, a reality. And here's where the narrative comes in. This is just something that we keep playing in our heads to tell us that we can't do that. And there's an enormous amount of power that we give to a narrative in our brains that I'll talk a little bit more about later that prevents us from actually taking a step, one step into the next direction. From concept and the idea of reframing that narrative, or how do we frame the narrative from going from A to B, it comes down to how do you shift the conversation you have with yourself inside your brain. A lot of us probably have conversations where we have a negative belief that we can't do the things that we want to do. For example, I would love to have a six-figure plus coaching business. I had to work really hard in removing the saboteur, in reshifting and reimagining the negative beliefs that I placed on myself and this idea that that wasn't possible. I had to do the work in writing out what it truly is that I fundamentally want for myself to reframe that narrative. If we are able to disconnect the false expectation that we can't do this, because that's not true, we can, and identify the strategies of how we're going to get to the place that we want to go, we can achieve what it is that we want to do. And we can actually get to the goals of where we want to go much faster. Now, everything, you know, you have to be realistic about your goals. But from a reframing perspective and reframing the narrative, the idea here is to disconnect from the expectation that was assigned to the task and the negativity that was applied to the idea, and reframe it to tell yourself how you can overcome it and how you can achieve it. So if we're going to reframe this negativity, let's use the example that I just shared. I can't have a six-figure coaching business. I can have a six-figure coaching business. Believing that I can is going to help me take the action. If I keep telling myself that I can't do it, when you know you can, is how you shift the negative belief and the limiting belief that we're carrying. This is the first one. This is the one where I mentioned the narrative, the millennial narrative, and it's really the ideas that we have in our heads about we were sold a bill of goods. Sometimes we feel like we need to return that bill of goods, but we're stuck with them. And the reality is that like your hopes and dreams are something that you really have the power to do. And I want you to take this opportunity if you're someone who is ultimately stuck in a space of not really quite being sure of how you can do something that you really want for yourself and really change the framework that you have in your head of thinking that you can't do it. Go from can't to can do. Second step here, or second theme or topic, is why our stories matter. So the connection from narrative to story is very simple. When we have a thought in our head, our minds are triggered to either achieve and do that thing or think negatively. And sometimes we find ourselves stuck because there may be multi-steps or multi-layers to a process of achieving something that oftentimes prevents our mindset from shifting back or going back to actually achieving the thing that we most want to do. From this perspective, I really want to highlight how psychologically and emotionally, if you share more of the things that you want to do, the positive impact you'll see in return, self-empowering it could be to share the story of what it is that you're trying to achieve. When you share more about the identity or the conversation or the topics of the things that you want to do, people are going to hear you. People are going to listen. And just taking that step of being able to tell and share what it is that you're trying to achieve is giving you the opportunity to know and create a positive narrative that you can actually do it. So an example of this is I often work with clients who are stuck in a mindset that is preventing them from overcoming goals or things in their lives. And whether you're in the career coaching side of things or in the life coaching side of things, these two things kind of meet in the center. So recently I was having a conversation with one of my clients who I've been noticing in their journaling that we went from very descriptive responses to some of the questions that they get asked in their journal prompts to really one line or one word. And I started to kind of, in my head, process what was happening here. And I reached out and I said, hey, I'm looking at your journal entries. I really wanted to understand a little bit more about what happened from you being able to be very specific and be very detailed and feeling empowered by sharing the stories of what your journal entry was based on the prompt to now these one liners that feel unfinished, but also feel like they're not a complete thought. And the struggle here, and I kind of had already come to this conclusion on my own, but I wanted to get the full story. The struggle here was that the person was feeling very overwhelmed and feeling as though they were biting off more than what they can chew. And not from a journaling perspective, but from a holistic perspective, all elements of their life. And their fire inside was dimming. And I had to look for a way to reignite the fire inside of them. What it really came down to was that the negative emotions that they were holding internally were holding them back from being able to see how all the positive and all the growth that they've accomplished in the last few months had not really triggered to continue. It was almost like there was a lot of positive writing, but not giving attention to the negative ideas that were holding them back. And getting to the point of it all, I helped the person really understand that the beliefs that they had, just because we're shifting the mindset up to be positive, and that's the focus, we really need to work hard to also give attention to those negative ideas and understand where they're coming from. Just because you're only listening to the good stuff here, the bad stuff is still there. And when we don't give that bad stuff attention to really reduce the energy that it's causing, it tends to kind of build up. It's like, if you sweep so much stuff under a rug to pretend that it's not there, you're going to start to see a mound of the rug. It's still there just because there's a rug over it. So really taking the power of saying, you know what, I have control over how I process and understand the ideas and the emotions and the thoughts that I have in my head. I'm able to shift my energy and use my own mindset and the power that I have to give attention to both, but also understand that the negative doesn't control the positive. And when we look at this example of being able to understand why our stories matter, every story has meaning. Every story has power. And the narrative that we create around the identity of those powers and those stories is going to be super important to really be able to come to the other side of things and be able to create space for you to share them. Because the whole idea of this week's episode is really being able to share your story and embrace your story. But also, even though there's negative to it, that you have the ability to say, own the positive, and the negative is not going to control the continuation of that conversation. And when you talk about the narrative and when you talk about why the story is important, the emotional connection that you have to the negative is just as important as the emotional connection you have to the positive. So really important there to understand that those experiences, whether positive or negative, that you're feeling in your life are going to be critical to your story. And also know that sharing them comes with an emotional attachment, comes with a opportunity for people to connect with you. Maybe there's someone that resonates with the story that you have or with your experience that can help them as well. At the same time, really being able to create connection. Another example of this exact situation was I have a friend who has a podcast, and I was on her podcast a few years back. And very recently, someone that she connected with listened to the podcast episode that I recorded on her show. And this person came to her and said, "Oh my God, his story is my story." And she found so much power behind the fact that, as traumatic and as negative as my story was, that someone else heard it, but they heard the message of how I overcame the trauma and the negativity and what I did to bring myself to the place that I am today. That's the goal, right? That's so that for me, when I tell my story, that's oftentimes a hard one to listen to, share it because I want other people who oftentimes are dealing with some heavy shit to know that you can come out on the other side and know that it doesn't define who you are to be living in a negative space. I had to work really hard, not just through therapy, but also for myself. Like, therapy was a great place to vent, but the work came from me. And my experience of my story had nothing to do with my therapy. My therapy comes from now, but I talk it through in my therapy because through that trauma that sometimes creeps up on me, it still exists. And that's why coaching is so important. You either have someone who really feels they need the mental health person who's a psychologist or a psychiatrist, or they think that they would want to work better with a coach, and that's where I come in. And I oftentimes have folks that come to me that think that they want to work with a life coach, and I end up having to give them a referral to a mental health provider because I sometimes feel that it's out of my realm of profession, but also expertise. And the person has some more triggering things that they need to consult with. So, kind of to bring this together when it comes to the power of telling your story and why your story matters, is that we all have a story. And every story that we live with and every experience that we live with and the identity about who we are as individuals have power. And it's important to exercise how you can embrace your story, but also give yourself grace and gratitude and remind yourself that you're human and why your story is important because you're unique. And that story that you have to share is an opportunity for you to go through a mindfulness journey when you share that. Go through the journey of being able to give other people the uniqueness of what your words are and your experience so that they themselves can connect to you. The power of connection, of being able to understand why you as an individual go from something that may have been a traumatic experience to something that has transformed your whole life. I've used I've taken the power of the negative experiences that I've had in my life and converted them to the ideas and the themes and the stories of what this podcast and my life experience is. And sometimes those things are a blessing, right? It's what makes you a stronger person. Sometimes with some psychological damage or emotional damage, you have to work a little bit harder to really process that story and heal from it. But you have an enormous amount of empowerment. And that's what I really want from you. So, why our story matters are exactly because we're able to heal, we're able to empower others, we're able to share our views and our experiences, and we're able to provide people with an understanding of who we are as individuals. And that's important. Moving on to the next theme, which is listening to the voice within. And from this perspective, I want you to really, really hone in on what it is that your saboteur, and the saboteur, for those who don't know, is inside you that creates self doubt, that creates negativity, that can sometimes be really ugly and really authoritative. I want you to really listen to that voice and I want you to fight back against that voice. This is where that reframing comes into play that I was talking about earlier. Listen to what that voice is telling you, and you own the power over that voice. Anytime we have an idea of something that we really want to achieve in our lives, anytime we have a vision for what it is that we want to accomplish, the saboteur will always come at you, and will come at you when you least expect it. It will come at you when you are probably at your best and all of a sudden bring you to your worst. It's important to be vigilant and be aware that the saboteur does its work when you have given it some energy and some attention in the worst way possible. What does that mean? So, for example, let's just use this example. I was going to give you a personal example, but I'm going to use this example. So, imagine that you're applying to a job and you read the description of this job, and then you start to realize, oh man, I'm not qualified for this job. I don't think this job is going to be a good fit. That voice, that idea that you just put into your brain is the saboteur at work. What you need to do is, even though you're listening to the saboteur because I'm asking you to, I'm asking you not to give it the energy. When it comes to reframing that, instead of saying, I'm not qualified enough for this job, I want you to reframe that and say, I have unique skills and experiences that make me a strong candidate for this job. When you take that small step to reframe what that looks like and what that sounds like, you're now removing that self-doubt and you're removing the energy that the saboteur is creating. A lot of the clients that I work with, I have them do an exercise that is by Positive Intelligence. And this exercise is free and it helps me understand the 8 or 9 different saboteurs that you have. And typically the top 4 or 5, all of them kind of rotate around, but the top 4 or 5 are the ones that are vigilant and pretty much live within the interior of your voice. The reason it's important to know why these saboteurs exist and where they come from and who they are is because they can be really ugly. And like I said before, when you're at your best, they can creep up inside your mind and shift the energy. And when you're working really hard towards something that you have created as a goal or a potential for yourself in your journey, you want to be really aware of why this little bastard's showing up and how you can shift it. So when you have awareness around the saboteur and that voice inside, you own the power. When you don't have the awareness is when it can let you slip away and trigger some negative thoughts. That story that you're trying to tell, that story that you're trying to give power to, can very much diminish very quickly. So moving to the third, so turning stories into action. And this to me is probably I think the saboteur one is really important. The one that's listening to the voice within. I can't tell you how important that is. Everyone has a light inside of them that I feel that oftentimes can be dimmed by the littlest thing. And although the pilot is still on, the flame is still there, we struggle sometimes to keep it lit and ignite it. I find so much energy and joy and passion with wanting to help people keep that flame lit for themselves. But I think it's just as important to take that energy and enthusiasm and excitement and turn that into action. Using, like, let's just say, for example, the story of the job application or the job position, the job posting. Let's take that into action. So then you read the job description, you know that you're now have the unique skills and experiences that make you a strong candidate. Let's take that to the next step and say, I'm going to create a really intuitive, fun cover letter that is going to help me apply to this job. But to take that into a step further, I'm now going to shift that from saying, I'm going to connect with the people who I know are my biggest cheerleaders. They're going to help me make sure that I'm going into this opportunity with eyes wide open and with a clear mindset. So reaching out to your support systems. These are a coach, a mentor, a therapist, your partner, The people who you know are going to embody and give you the strength to make sure that your cover letter is clean, you have your LinkedIn profile in superb shape, and that you're going to connect with the people at the company. Sometimes this is more of a coaching thing than it is from anything else, but talking to people who are your mentors and the people who really have been inspiring for you and the people that have always gotten your back are always great when you're in a position of taking action. They're going to be the ones that are going to be your accountability buddy or accountability coach. When you start to take the next steps, know that there's always an opportunity for that saboteur to sneak in. Be very aware it doesn't go away. You can do all the work, but the fucker's still there. So taking action is going to be key. Taking action is going to spark the light, keep that pilot and that ignition alive and keeping the flame lit. So not going back, making sure that you're becoming aware and you're becoming the catalyst for the change that you're trying to create. You want to get this job. You want to do all the things that you need to do to show up and be visible and connect with the right people and be present and engaging. It's a win, right? The next thing is, how do you share your story authentically? Authenticity is obviously something that has become more talked about. And I think for our generation, authenticity is always been key. I think that as we've gotten older as millennials, the formation of authenticity has framed and give us an opportunity to use our voice more. I, for myself, have noticed that every experience that I've had in the last 10 years till now has given me a stepping block or a stage to really share and be vulnerable and do it authentically, because I know that others who are out there are going to be empowered, but also need to hear that story or need to hear that experience. And I want to be able to use some of the mistakes that I've made in my journey so that others don't have to live through or make those same mistakes. So, really important that in sharing your story, you share it authentically, meaning it's true to who you are, that you're able to share it without feeling like you're going to be judged or feeling like you're going to be rejected. Know that nor the reason why, your why and why you're sharing it. Because it's really important to know that sometimes in the world we live in, this is unfortunate, we have people that are trolls. We have people that will be negative to share an opinion that's ugly. And that's okay, right? That's okay. That's just the nature of the human race sometimes, that we have individuals that are not often on the same side as you. But know that you are going to get that as you continue to empower yourself, as you continue to spark and light up your voice. And that is going to be key to keep your flame and your pilot lit, keep you energized for the space. There's always places where you can be vulnerable. And there's always places that are safe spaces to share your story. And one of the things that really pulls at my heartstrings is from, I don't remember the name of the book. She has so many of them. Brené Brown. If you've never read a Brené Brown book, I highly suggest you jump on the bandwagon, because she is just an amazing author, speaker. Her TED Talks are just beautiful. Her podcast is always sometimes very inspirational for some of the episodes that I share in the podcast. But her research on vulnerability is a birthplace for connection. It's an opportunity for us to share the imperfect parts of ourselves, the struggles that we face as human beings, the struggles that we face as millennials, if we're talking about the millennial generation. And it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to create space. It's an opportunity to create community that we can exercise for ourselves, to really be able to share our stories, for us to be able to take action, for us to be able to feel like we are kicking the saboteur to the side. And maybe it's coming live to share what the saboteur that's coming up for you right now. So really being able to be empowered. And I find it really important that as we go through our lives and our journey, that everyone has a voice. I am empowered to make sure that people are sharing their voice, not just authentically, but have the opportunity to feel like they can share in a safe space, that they can be vulnerable and connect with people, and that everything that we have inside of us is a light that just needs to continuously be lit. Add more, the saying, add fuel to the fire. Have your vulnerability, have your radical empathy, the mindset be that fuel to the fire for you that can create a space for you to really feel as though you're connecting with others who have like minded ideas, that you're able to identify people that have the ability to give you this time and the energy and give you feedback that's constructive and feedback that can help you grow. And really connecting with people that ultimately want to help you be a better person, because we all want to be good at the end. We all want to have a positive experience at the end. And sometimes that can be a challenge to find people that can be our cheerleader or our accountability coach, our accountability partner. So, having said all that, I know that this was a lot to kind of unpack and uncover when it came to those 5 areas. Hope all of them resonate with you in one shape or form. If any of them don't resonate with you, we should probably have a conversation to learn more about what you're experiencing and how are you feeling and what it is that's happening. Because I think that if you're not connecting to any of these 5 themes or these 5 ideas of transforming, negativity into action and what your story is, there's something there. And I'm here for it here. I'm a coach. At the end of the day, this is my passion. This is my journey. This is what my God-given talent is, and what I was put on this earth to do is to really help people in every step of their life and every phase of their life. And the podcast has always served as pivotal points to really help people connect to me, but also know that this is a space where you can come and listen to what I'm sharing that's going to empower you. So let's wrap this episode up. Obviously, today's episode was focused on embracing your story and transforming negativity into action. We went through the millennial narrative and we discussed what that looks like and what that means and how to use the narrative to make it positive. We went through why our stories matter and the emotional and psychological connection to our stories, and sometimes how our stories can be traumatic, but the importance about sharing them and why they're so important to share with the world. We discussed listening to the voice within and how we can practice mindfulness and how we can always acknowledge the saboteur, but also don't give the saboteur the attention that it wants. Actually, take action with the saboteur and reframe the ideas in our head. Really, really important there. We also discuss turning stories into action and why that's so important. When you're looking at the listening to the voice within, you need to start taking action. Take that voice and take action with it and run with it. And finally, we looked at how sharing our stories authentically can empower us to be better version of ourselves, and being vulnerable, how that really frames the person that we are. So I hope this episode really resonated with you in some way, shape, or form, like I mentioned before. Some things to consider is that if you're in a position right now where you're feeling stuck and you're really not sure how to get unstuck, go to my website, coachingformillennials.com. I have a free guide that can really help you go from unstuck to clarity and really helping you take action from a mindset perspective, from an emotional intelligence perspective. It's a great guide that I feel is really going to be a high impact for people. And if you're willing to take, 20, 30 minutes to read a book, I wrote an ebook that I shared. It's not published officially, so it's a PDF version that you can download. It's $7. This ebook is called The Millennial Mindset, Coaching Strategies for how to get successful in work and life. And so these 2 key, pieces of information are going to be really helpful for people. And then lastly, coaching. If you're ready to invest in yourself, invest in your future, invest in your journey of life, take a look at my coaching packages. There's a package for everybody. And the one thing I'll say about my coaching packages is that I give very short descriptions for what each package is. In conversation, hopefully someone who's interested is going to reach out and connect with me to understand what it is that I really do. And there's a journey that happens there. Anybody that's worked with me has gone on a journey. And sometimes I have clients that I work with that I've worked with for years. I've had clients that I've worked with once. I have clients that I've worked with once and then came back and then left and came back again. So everyone's on a different journey. Know that those packages are there for that intention. And I hope that this episode fuels you and enlightens you and empowers you. So having said all that, thank you so much for tuning in this week. And if you like this episode, be sure to give it a like, subscribe, and follow, and share it with the world. Love you, boo.